IOD in the east of England, which is where our speaker hails from a beautiful sunny Norfolk. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you, members. It's fantastic to see you, and thank you for continuing to support the IOD through what has been a very, very difficult time. But I believe one of our guests has just mentioned in the chat that the webinars have been a great way for IOD members to connect and to meet with each other. For those non-members who are joining with us this evening, you're also extremely welcome. Oh, I've got some motorbikes going down the road. Sorry about that. For our non-members, just to let you know, very potted a little bit about the IOD. An organisation for directors, enabling directors to be the best directors that they can be. Vital at the moment, always important, but extremely vital. We work on 3 premises. We enable you to connect, to develop, and to influence. Connect is through events like this, where you can actually meet other people and learn. Chris is going to help us all to learn some very useful information this evening. Develop is about our professional development qualifications, world leading, and really, really important, a variety of courses, both face-to-face and now digitally available. And influence is the ability to have your voice heard via our policy team within the government and by policy leaders. They want to know what IOD members are saying, because our membership is about you as an individual. It's not about your company. It's about what you're thinking and feeling as the leaders of our, and who can make the economy better. Sorry, I'm getting all mixed up. So, Chris is going to talk to us today about procurement for non-procurement directors. I've benefited from our IOD course, Finance for Non-Financial Directors, and I have to say it's absolutely brilliant. And we can't be experts in everything, but thankfully we have experts who can help us to learn. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Chris. Before I do, if you could have a quick read of the slide that is on which I'm sure you've already done. Chris would be delighted to take your questions at the end of the session, I believe. But Chris is in charge. He's usually in charge of an aeroplane, and today he's in charge of our procurement. So over to you, Chris, and thank you.
Thank you, Simone. The procurement for non-procurement directors is a play on the Finance for Non-Finance Directors course. We've got John Geldart and Malcolm Harrison SIPS meeting on Monday, and that's one of the ideas I've fleshed out for them, so hopefully that actually happens. But I like the title so much I thought I'd steal it myself. So good evening, welcome, thank you for joining this evening. Beautiful sunny day, so thank you for staying inside and joining me. I'm Chris. I am F6 chartered, which might not mean anything to you straight away, but hopefully will over the course of the next few minutes or so. I've worked in procurement for almost 2 decades, straight from nursery school. Initially as a civil servant with HM Treasury and subsequently Cabinet Office, before moving into the social housing sector to set up a new procurement function from scratch. And latterly I've been doing it via my own consultancy business, CJC Procurement. A classic case of redundancy to enlightenment, or at least redundancy money to private pilot's license. And as Simone's already mentioned, I'm pretty excited tonight, despite my monotone voice. I get to fly a plane tomorrow for the first time in 5 months, so I'm very much looking forward to that. I was honoured to be highly commended in the new director category, the IOD East Director of the Year Awards a couple of years ago, and as Simone's mentioned, I'm on the IOD East team as procurement ambassador, and basically try to make as much noise about procurement as a foundation for good governance as I can. So strap yourselves in. So who is spending up to 70% of your revenue was the strapline of this session. So let's get started. And what I've prepared to cover is some basics. Now, with an event like this, it's hard to know where quite to pitch it. So there's lots of experts in the room, but also this could be new to some of you. So I've purposefully tried to keep it pretty simple. We're going to cover the basics, what is procurement, what is SIPS, etc. Then I'm going to give you my view. It sounds like a standard thing, 3 pillars of procurement, but it's my view on what they are. And then we're going to cover a couple of simple tools that I live and breathe by day in, day out, which hopefully will be easily and simple for you to understand and possibly apply yourselves. Then I'm going to talk a little about savings versus profit, and we'll talk through a very fictitious, very simple worked example. before we reflect on actions you might want to take and a little discussion around reporting lines for procurement and board issues that should be being considered right now. So hopefully that matches the event write-up that you signed up for. And let's get started, shall we? So the basics, what is SIPS or who is SIPS? Very much like the Institute of Directors, which is actually a chartered institute of directors, and we'll probably be increasingly hearing the use of chartered in terms of IOD as a differentiator soon. SIPS is the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Its origins stem back to 1932 as the Purchasing Officers Association, but it received its royal charter quite recently in 1992, and 86 years after the IOD did. And perhaps its relative recency in terms of being chartered is one of the reasons why it's not as established as HR, marketing, law, finance, etc. in boardroom thinking. But it is getting there, but slowly. And hopefully it'll be game changing after tonight, right, guys? SIPS sets the global standards for the procurement profession and is an awarding body and provides accredited qualifications linked to a set of global standards. It is known worldwide, similar to the IOD. IOD is known worldwide, but there are other institutes. For example, the US has the Institute of Supply Management, but just like the IOD, it is the only chartered institute in this profession. So what is procurement? Now, I can see on the attendee list, there are one or two fellows of SIPS on the call. And one of the challenges procurement does have is that if you put 100 procurement professionals in a room and ask them to define procurement, you'll get 100 different variations along a very similar theme, which doesn't always help us. But in the most basic terms, it's the buying of goods and services, enabling the organisation to operate in a profitable and ethical manner. And its scope is throughout the entire value chain, from raw materials through to end product and recycling, disposal, contract management, and supply relationships. So it's pretty much end to end. And procurement, and in this sense, I mean the act rather than necessarily the procurement personal function, is often responsible for spending 70% of a company's revenue. And that statistic must be true because I took it straight from the front of the SIPS website. So any reduction in costs can have a huge impact on private sector profits or the ability to deliver public services in the public sector. Just to illustrate that point, as I said, I work in social housing, and this is a snippet from a survey from earlier this year before lockdown, and this was a survey into finance and IT procurement, and you can see here that 30% of IT functions across the housing sector, which spends a lot of money, you'd be surprised how much money is sloshing through that sector, have no access to procurement support of any type. And in my world, that's quite common. So whether or not a procurement function exists at all is the first question. But poor old IT teams, who aren't necessarily known for their commercial nous in negotiation, yeah, sometimes they need more help than they get. But that's just an example of where sectors where there's just no procurement support at all. So what is MSIPS? So MSIPS is the professional benchmark for individuals working in procurement supply. An MSIPS holder will be a full member of SIPS and will have achieved an internationally recognised qualification linked to the global standards for procurement supply. And it's a comprehensive competency framework applicable to all industries and sectors and accounts for all levels in an organisation's hierarchy from junior buyer to chief procurement officer. Achieving MSIPS is no small undertaking. It's definitely equivalent to a degree, both in terms of effort, which I'll run through in a second, but also in cost to undertake. One of the things that I think SIPS has got right is that it's got a clear qualifications ladder. So with junior through to middle management entry points at levels 2, 3 and 4, you can see on the screen, through to achieving MSIPS, which with the highest entry point at level 4, the diploma in procurement supply, which needs to be completed before level 5, which needs to be completed before level 6. You get the gist. And you have to achieve that level 6 professional diploma before you then apply to SIPS for MSIPS status. I'm just going to quickly run through the effort you have to go to. So level 4, the diploma, 8 core modules, including commercial contracting, commercial negotiation, and supply relationships. 250 guided learning hours, 335 hours of self-study, 15 hours of exams. Level 5, five core modules, 3 optional modules, including contract and financial management, managing supply chain risk, and category management. And by the way, category management, if I mention it later, which I probably will, and if you're not familiar with it, it's simply a methodology to carving up and specialising in areas of procurement focus, for example, IT, HR, marketing, etc. But level 5 is another 250 guided learning hours, 335 hours of self-study, another 15 hours of exams. And you can guess what level 6 is about as well. Another 4 core modules, 4 more optional modules, including strategic ethical leadership, global commercial strategy, and commercial data management. Another 250 guided learning hours, 335 self-study hours, and 15 hours of exams. And unlike a degree where you go to university and probably do it full-time study, you're probably doing this full-time work whilst you're working. So in all, to complete the level 4, 5, and 6 and achieve professional diploma qualification, you've got to do a total of 1,800 hours total qualification time, which I calculated to be 2.5 hours every working day for 3 years, including 45 hours of exams over 23 modules. So it's not a, it's not a small undertaking. At which point you can then apply to SIPS for the MSIP status, as they all done whilst you're probably working full time, looking after family, etc. And whilst it's achievable in 3 years, it's more likely to take 5 to 6 years. And we're not finished there, ladies and gentlemen. SIPS recognised the need to link the academic qualification achieved in a particular point in a person's career with a way to license professionals to ensure they're current and up to date. So if you're MSIPs, you're on an annual basis, you can complete an ethics exam, which is 3 hours and a test, complete and record a minimum of 30 CPD hours, pay your membership fee, and then upgrade to chartered procurement and supply professional status. And if you're really lucky and SIPS notice your career, you might be invited to apply for fellowship and then become FSIPS chartered, the cream of the crop, which a few of us, others are on school. And the other thing about procurement is that we like to check for evidence, and that starts with ourselves. So you're all publicly welcome to go to the SIPS website and check our credentials on the professional register on the SIPS website. I did that on myself earlier, and I must admit I was a bit relieved when I got the result that I got. Otherwise it could be a bit embarrassing. So yeah, you can check any person that says they're SIPS or MSIPs. You can check, put their surname into that professional register on the site, and you can check. So, having told you all about FSIPs and chartered, first poll of the evening, please, Caroline. Because this winds me up personally. So, if you were writing a person spec for a new procurement director position at your company, would you consider MSIPs or FSIPs chartered as either desirable, required, or you wouldn't mention it at all? Gives me a break. Gives your ears a break. How are we doing, Caroline?
We're okay. We're 14 of 19, so it's kind of a... Oh, no, it's still going up. Couple more seconds.
My fellow fellows are probably abstaining, right?
Right, okay, we're 15 of 19, so I'll end the poll and...
Okay. What we got?
There you go.
Okay. I'll take that. In my experience, it's not particularly scientific, but quite a lot of job specs don't mention SIPS at all. Some, if they do, say it's desirable. I see very few that require it, and I haven't yet seen one that asks for chartered. So given that chartered is the current, it shows your currency, I'm yet to see chartered procurement professional being the requirement. So some work to do. Thanks for that. So Next, I wanted to give you my view on what the three pillars of procurement are. So, you know, qualifications and fancy titles aside, what do we actually do? SIPS presents a comprehensive and busy procurement and supply cycle on the website. It takes you step by 13 steps through the life cycle of procurement's interests, from defining business needs at step 1 through to supplier relationship management and asset management at steps 12 and 13. Most organisations will likely have a procurement policy, however mature or detailed that may or may not be, which will to some extent cover this cycle, or if your business has a procurement function, its processes and procedures will follow this to a greater or lesser extent. But of course, in reality, the extent to which the full rigour of this process applies day to day is questionable. It has to flex proportionately. And of course, should be administered by chartered professionals, of course. But in simple terms, procurement focuses on three aspects or pillars, in my view. Firstly, and most widely recognised, is sourcing, the buying bit, where requirements are taken to market in some way and the results and a purchase being made in a contract with a supplier usually. The second and third pillars tend to depend on the maturity of the organisation in question and the maturity of the procurement function, assuming there even is one. But contract management is increasingly critical and increasingly the battleground for procurement today, because so much focus, time and effort is usually invested in the process to enter into a contract, and more often than not, that is when strategic focus stops, and procurement teams typically don't either have the resource or the remit to oversee the management of contract delivery, and it's a critical area for development of procurement, because in my view, no one ever saved any money by letting a contract. Value is only achieved by managing that contract to ensure it delivers what you thought you were buying at the price you thought you were buying it. And thirdly, supplier relationship management. It's been around for a long time, but it's probably the more recent of the areas of focus. And whilst it might include suppliers that you currently do business with, it can overlap with contract management. Supplier relationship management is one step removed from contract management, and focuses on long-term relationship building, market shaping, market development, and delivers value at all stages of the procurement cycle, from developing a competitive environment for tenders through to continuously developing and maintaining market knowledge, informing corporate thinking, and through collaborative processes such as value engineering, innovation sessions, and industry lobbying, etc. Best practice procurement functions have responsibility for all three areas nowadays, and are empowered to work collaboratively with stakeholders across the business to effect good purchasing decisions, manage the delivery of contracted outcomes whilst maintaining good relationships with suppliers and the market. But it's often not practical, as I said, to undertake that full procurement cycle, do full contract management or full supplier relationship management with every supplier. So proportionality is of critical importance. And I want to share with you these two simple tools that I've mentioned, which I apply day in, day out in a wide variety of circumstances as a way of kind of determining what proportionate strategy might mean in context. So yeah, simple tools. Wouldn't it be nice, guys, to live in a world where no coronavirus exists, where there's unlimited resources, unlimited time to make sure we do the right things perfectly, and it's take as long as it takes? Whereas the reality is there's never enough resource, never enough time, and hindsight has a terrible track record of always turning up after the event. Life in procurement is all about compromise, and I'm sure there are dozens of tools and techniques out there that you've all heard about on webinars, probably like these, to help us organise things and do what we can. All of those models have their flaws, the nuances and academic critiques, and these two are no different, but in portfolio analysis and supply preferencing, I found two tools that I use day in, day out that shape my thinking, my approach, and my decision making on what proportion it is. And I've thought a lot about these over the last few years. So I'm quickly going to go through the theory. I hopefully won't bore you too much. And then I'll try and bring them to life a little bit in the worked example I mentioned earlier on. So portfolio analysis, otherwise known as the Kraljic matrix. He was the originator. Everybody's had their own flavour of it, but portfolio analysis is how I know it. It's a 4-box model. Everybody's got one, with relative spend and relative importance on the x-axis and market difficulty and business risk on the y-axis. And it helps us to categorize spend or contracts or goods or services at any level in the organization, and allows us to think about them in terms of criticality and importance. It highlights your high importance business critical strategic goods and services. It identifies your critical low volume goods and services. It highlights your high spend yet easily obtained leverage goods and services, and also your low value, low critical acquisition goods and services. Understanding your current or historic spend is a useful starting point, and you might be able to do a detailed spend analysis to do that. Or if you like a shortcut, if you're familiar with the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your spend is with the top 20 suppliers and etc., then you could simply just do a Pareto analysis to put them on the left or right hand side if you want to have a shortcut. But it's as flexible as you want to do. You can spend days and days and days and months and months and months looking at this, or you can do it relatively simply. Of course, the more you think about this, the quicker you can come. So I tend to operate on a day-to-day basis with this model in mind. Business criticality and market difficulty takes a little bit more effort. You have to understand your market, do some market research, and importantly, you can't decide how critical something is without involving your stakeholders. So lots of business discussion, lots of internal discussion with stakeholders to understand the true criticality of products and services. And I'm sure most businesses have truly started to understand which suppliers are critical to them over the last few months. And this type of reassessment of critical suppliers has been going on in boardrooms around the globe more than ever before. PPE suppliers probably weren't critical in 2019, but things change. But once we've done some assessment of our spend areas, we can start to assess where best to deploy resources. Naturally, I would want to focus attention on the most critical areas and where action might have the biggest impact, and consider appropriate commercial tactics for strategic suppliers, where long-term partnership relationships, collaboration, innovation, full supplier relationship management might be very sensible investment of effort. But equally, as long as the supply of routine or acquisition goods and services is okay, I'm probably not going to focus much of my time and effort sorting that out. For leverage spend areas, this is probably where procurement gets its traditional reputation. That's where it's probably appropriate to tender a lot, reverse auctions, go to market frequently, and be okay with switching supplier. And for critical spend areas, I might want to invest effort into market development to increase supplier competition, or work with internal stakeholders to lower the reliance or importance of that product or service to my business, because it's probably where the most risk is, particularly reflecting on supplier perspectives in that area, which we'll come on to in a second. But as a standalone model, I think it's pretty good, but it's pretty much internally focused. And for anybody who knows me, I talk a lot about relationships. So this doesn't work unless you take into account something else, which is supplier preferencing. It's a similar matrix model, but this time we reflect on the supplier's or the market's view of us as a customer. So we consider the relative value of our business to that supplier or to that market against the likely attractiveness of our account on the Y. So our business is likely to be core to the supplier if we spend a relatively large amount of money with them, and our account is attractive, associated with our brand, or further repeat business potentially, or simply we pay our invoices on time. Our business is likely to be development if the supplier believes there is scope for significant sales growth from us, making us highly attractive with a view to increasing relative spend. If our relative spend is high, but for some reason we're not seen as an attractive customer, maybe we don't pay our bills on time, our business might be classed as exploitable, where supplier is simply trying to maximize their money from us. Or at worst, we might have low relative spend in an unattractive customer, and we might simply be considered a nuisance account. So compared to portfolio analysis, this is a far less objective model to assess, and it does require professional judgment, which comes from deep market understanding, analysing feedback from supplier relationship management. But with good procurement controls in place, you can observe supplier behaviour, For example, how much interest is there in tenders that you run, or how responsive to requests are your suppliers? How long does the amazing sales team that wins your business in the first place hang around, or do they just disappear? Or do your suppliers actually stop taking your calls at all, which does happen? You could ask the supplier what they think of you, of course, and see what feedback you get. But a key theme to think of here, and it's probably where this helps my clients certainly start thinking about things differently, is, are you a customer of choice? What does your business do to make itself attractive to the supply market? What are you like to do business with? So I tend to think of both of those models together. And in doing so, I think it's an incredibly useful pair of tools to determine strategy and changes the approach to fostering companies' relationships with suppliers, which is a line straight out of the Companies Act 2006, from transactional to a relationship-focused approach, which is much more likely to deliver predictable outcomes and successful outcomes, in my view. And whilst it's useful to determine internally our most critical spend areas, for example, there's no point in approaching the market for a long-term partnership deal if the supplier views you as exploitable or as a nuisance client. Neither is there any value of your business to your business of your executives investing their time in supply relationship management activities with acquisition suppliers just because that supplier is targeting your business and they happen to have a box at Twickenham. So in the write-up to this event, you were promised 2 simple tools which can be applied at a strategic level, and I hope you can start reflecting on those and see how they might be useful, and potentially how relevant they might be in the boardroom when considering what impacts outsourcing decisions might be, or how well understood critical suppliers are to both parties in a merger or an acquisition, and what issues or risks might present during growth. For example, will your suppliers actually hold you back or help you do so? So there's lots to think about in those. And it's also the answer to the question, why is a procurement process different every time? Because the combination of those factors is different every time. So it's the answer to the question, why is procurement different every time? Of course, chartered procurement professionals are familiar with a range of strategic analysis tools. Here's a randomly picked list of another 7 widely known tools, which category managers and chartered procurement professionals will consider in the development of procurement strategies or corporate strategies. But a point I'd kind of like to highlight here is that procurement practitioner familiarity with these strategic tools and their regular use of them in their professional life does tend to make them strategic thinkers with eyes wide open to the market and trends. And it seems strange to me that these capabilities are not more readily encouraged or included in the strategic thinking of executive teams or management boards, or brought into organisations in a non-executive capacity. Or if they are, it seems strange that there might be duplicate effort with execs doing it and procurement teams doing it, or even worse, bringing big 4 consultancies in who often to do this work whilst you've already got the knowledge internally anyway. I mean, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on why that might be. Perhaps it's simply that procurement professionals are so awesome that we're perceived as a threat to traditional execs, who knows. So next break point, the second poll, if we can, Caroline, whilst I pause and give your ears another break. Which of the following 2 words do you associate procurement with most?
Right. Okay. Oh, another one. Okay. There you go.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I wasn't expecting 20% on profit. I was expecting that to be lower, but that's good. Okay. Yeah. Savings is typically it's the millstone, but also our bread and butter, I think, in procurement. It's never going away, but hopefully we can perhaps make ourselves more attractive by thinking about things a bit differently. So savings versus profit. One of the issues procurement has is its association with savings, which quite often, to be brutally honest, no one ever believes. They're all fake and they're reported at the point of contract award and unrelated to what actually then happens with spend. And when the money's saved, it gets spent elsewhere anyway. So not that it's not that important. Of course, savings are important. And of course, we'll always hit our savings targets. But it's as frustrating for us in procurement as it is for people that think we should be doing more. But perhaps if we talked more about our contribution to profit, we'd probably hear more about procurement at board level. I'm not sure, who knows. Right, storytelling is apparently one of the more effective ways to communicate. I'm not an author yet, though, so, but I'm going to have a go. I'm going to attempt to tell you the fictitious story of Random Product Limited. It's entirely fictitious, but some of the procurement tactics are real, and the HR issue I reference, if you spot it, is real. And hopefully it'll bring to life the use of the portfolio analysis and supply preferencing. So here goes. Random Product Limited currently does not have a chartered director in its management team. Oh dear. And does not have any procurement function beyond a single junior procurement officer who bears the entire firm's responsibility for the single line entry in the annual reports and accounts in respect of value for money being achieved for shareholders. It makes a product with 5 component parts, some processing, and the company has some indirect spend and overheads. And last year it had a revenue of 1.2 million, a profit of 225,000, selling 1,000 widgets. Yes, I'm keeping this very simple. They appointed a wise sage of a non-executive director who suggested to the CEO one day that the IOD does not view the lack of procurement investment as good governance. So action was taken and the adventure began. Firstly, Random invested in a procurement function. It hired a chief procurement officer and a team of chartered procurement professionals, and they started to conduct a detailed spend analysis and work with stakeholders across the business to conduct a strategic analysis and develop proportionate category strategies for all spend areas using portfolio analysis and supply preferencing tools. The supplier of Part A operates in a constrained market, providing a critical high-cost part and is viewed as a strategic supplier. Full contract management and supplier relationship management is deployed, and a long-term partnership is developed, including joint initiatives on cost reduction and innovation. Part A price is reduced by 20%, but importantly, the supplier's profit margin is maintained to protect them. The market for Part B is highly competitive, with lots of sources of supply and low switching costs, with negligible impact on quality either up or down. The current supplier has a track record of small, consistent price increases without reason, a sign that Random is exploitable. Despite the pressure from one of Random Products Limited's senior managers, who wants to continue to trade with the same supplier they've used for years, and which is entirely coincidentally, of course, owned by the same manager's cousin, a reverse auction is in this leveraged market secures a sustainable 25% price reduction. The supplier of Part C clearly sees Random as a development customer and has invested a lot of management effort into engaging with executives and ensuring good contract performance. And this is a critical item. So procurement work to reward the supplier through agreeing a long-term contract extension, which in turn gives the supplier the certainty it requires in current conditions to survive, and also to protect its own supply chain. And also the longer commitment unlocks a 10% price reduction. Now, the finance director of Random was very disappointed that no savings were achieved on Part D, and he highlighted the abject failure of the procurement team to the CEO. What the CEO discovered was the procurement team had been notified by the sole supplier of this critical part that due to currency fluctuations, prices were going to be increased by 20% across the board unilaterally to all customers. However, because of the relationship management activities and the advocacy and transparent approach procurement had initiated, this price would be delayed for at least 12 months, possibly longer. Part E was categorised as acquisition, and whilst the supplier was providing a good enough service, procurement action was not deemed proportionate at the time, and resource was focused on indirect spends instead. The operations director was a key stakeholder in the successes achieved above. and agreed that suppliers would be invited to conduct some value analysis to innovate Random's processes in subsequent years. But for now, processing costs are unchanged. Whereas the energy costs, procurement is run to appoint a third-party energy consultancy, costs of energy contracts reduced by 10%. And I can see Kevin on my screen right now. Whilst it makes no sense whatsoever to cut IT budgets, the IT specialist worked with the CIO to achieve some quick wins, negotiate software license pricing down by 10%, and in doing so gave the CIO certainty of a software platform for a digital transformation planning exercise. Is he nodding his head? Yes. Good, excellent. The marketing procurement specialist supported the marketing director in avoiding budget cuts and ensured that no savings would be targeted from marketing spend because it's pointless saving money from marketing spend. Instead, marketing agencies were reviewed and clearer outcome-focused project briefs were drafted, and a competitive process led to new agencies being appointed and responsible for measuring marketing return on investment, so more bang for your buck. The HR procurement specialist aggregated temp and perm spend and worked with the HR director to appoint a master vendor agency and reduced annual fees by 10%. And the legal procurement specialist worked with company secretariat to review legal spend and procure legal panel with transparent, competitive upfront rates, reducing costs by 10%. I like 10%, it's an easy number to do maths on. Right, this is an interesting one. Or it might not be, who knows. The cost of sales also reduced, which the sales director attributed to two factors. Procurement were now reviewing sales team bids before submission to customers, improving the quality of bid submissions and a higher success rate, and also helping sales team disqualify opportunities quicker. Secondly, procurement was being proactive in respect to supply chain issues and risks, sustainability, modern slavery, living wage, gender pay gap, qualified personnel in key roles, tax being paid, financial viability of suppliers, as well as contract performance being tracked. All this effort was then described to customers to give them assurance of the good governance in place at Random, which made them a far more attractive supplier to do business with to customers. As a result of this investment made in professional procurement, Random Product Limited saw a profit margin increase, and for the same 1,000 widgets, profit went up to 336,000. All fully believable, right? Now, of course, Random Product Limited could have looked to increase profits to 336,000 another way. Firstly, they could simply have decided not to invest in procurement at all, and instead double the sales function and almost double sales, which might have reduced margin slightly, but would have delivered the same outcome. However, the CEO had seen the vision of the future and dreamt of having cake and eating cake, so she did. The procurement function was vested in, and the numbers previously explained were delivered, and the more effective sales function was also doubled. And then true competitive advantage was achieved, as the board approved a joint recommendation from sales, operations and procurement to invest some of the improved margin into a sustainable price cut from 1,200 to 1,150, which gave the sales team more flexibility with customers and an increase of sales of 2.5 to 1, so 2,500 units, not 1,000, and a decent profit. So much profit that they even had enough money to buy a table at the SIP Supply Management Awards at Grosvenor House, Park Lane, where they won the Step Change for Procurement Award. And they all lived happily ever after, except perhaps for that senior manager who was fired for corruption. The end. Third poll, I think, whilst I let you recover from that. So in your experience, have you ever connected procurement with sales success, either through internal bid reviews or through ensuring customers hear about the impact procurement is making? Yes, no, or not convinced of the link?
Okay, I think that's everybody.
Good. Hope that wasn't just because of my random story. That was literally random. I think it's certainly something we need to do more of. Okay. So, at the risk of getting on my soapbox, I just want to talk about reporting lines and the debate that rages in procurement around where should procurement report to. In my experience, procurement often sits at a middle management level in organisations, and it struggles to get heard at senior levels and hardly gets any airtime at board level. The impact of this is that procurement spends far too much time trying to manage upwards and influencing senior leaders rather than getting on with the business of what they should be doing. And once they've got sign off to strategy, they seem to be constantly having to seek approval and sign off and permission. But where should it be? So in my experience, and others will have different and correct me, when procurement reports into finance, it tends to be analytical function, solely focused on savings, spend limitation, and quite often staff become demoralised and CFOs effectively wonder if they could just simply outsource it. Quite generous statement, bold statement, but that's, in my experience, tends to be how it works. When procurement reports into a governance role, it tends to focus on compliance to policy and procedures and is simply seen as the police, blockers, bureaucrats, obstacles, hurdles to deal with, and doesn't help. And this one's not as bad, but when procurement reports into operations, it tends to focus solely on direct costs at the exclusion of indirect, and tends to focus on lean efficiencies rather than potentially shaping future approaches to supply and customer markets. All of those areas have their place, but a best practice procurement function will probably have more impact when it has the power to hold peer executives to account rather than ask them for permission, and leverage its links across the organisation. Stakeholders deliver bold plans and long-term value-adding strategies. Procurement tends to have ears and eyes across your business. It tends to know what is going on the ground, and I think a lot of that value gets lost by it being constrained at a middle management level, in my view. Whether or not, therefore, you should have a chief procurement officer reporting to the CEO or a head of procurement with a management board sponsor, directors might be better served by enabling procurement to take a more proactive part at a strategic level, however that is done. And it certainly pays to do so, and thank you, Simon, if you're still with us, you are, who pointed this out. It reminded me of this yesterday. The global management consultancy A.T. Kearney conduct regular research and compile their return on supply management assets, or ROSMA report, and report that the best procurement functions continue to deliver 7 times their cost. So they found that procurement consistently delivers more than $1.7 million in financial benefits per procurement employee. So investing in procurement is effectively making money. So some boardroom considerations. I wanted to list out some of the procurement issues which either are or should be considered in the boardroom, and they probably discussed whether or not they're thought of in terms of procurement and supply chain language or not. You'll all no doubt be aware of the obligations on you as directors under the Companies Act 2006 to promote the success of the company through fostering the company's business relationships with suppliers as well as customers. And yet we all hear about putting the customer at the heart of everything that we do, and very rarely involve the suppliers in our strategic thinking. Or if you're in the public sector or a body governed by public law, how are you ensuring you're taking account of the public contract regulations which oblige you to take care of taxpayers' money? Please do so through proper procurement. COVID-19 recovery supply chain. So who are your critical suppliers? Were they who you thought they were? What has been the impact on them? Are they still viable as a business? Do you need to take procurement action to protect your business? Do you need to consider nearshoring supply from China, for example, or disaggregating spend to spread your supply chain risk across multiple suppliers? There's lots of thinking to be done, and it needs to be done strategically with some clout. An interesting one here, perhaps you'll give me your views on, is around restructuring. And as the government's furlough scheme is wind down towards October, it's inevitable companies have to consider restructuring and making redundancies. Employment lawyers that I've spoken to recently and trade unions may well start asking for evidence that you've mitigated job losses through leveraging procurement. They're getting wise to starting to ask that question. How are you mitigating the job losses through saving money through procurement action? And for the board itself, part of your duty is to hold the CEO to account. How are you ensuring that they are maximising the value from suppliers? And how are they truly controlling spend and maximising shareholder value from supply chain activities? Beyond bland VFM statements in annual accounts prepared by marketing usually. And then there's some other big issues that SIPs are focusing on, which is how seriously are you taking Modern Slavery Act in your business, and have you found it in your supply chain yet? Because the assumption is that it is in your supply chain and it is in this country, not only allegedly in Leicestershire, for example, but we're all responsible for seeking it out, even if it's simply just selfishly protect our own brands. How seriously are you taking into account sustainability and CSR and the environment? What lengths are you going to do as a business yourself, and how are you leveraging your supply chain power to affect change in your suppliers? Going paperless yourself is one thing, but putting it in your tenders and the contract that your supplier shall be paperless, you have a lot of power in enforcing all these changes in your supply chain. It's easier to get your suppliers to do it than sometimes you, and your customers will start asking for it. Where are your supply chain risks and where might you be exposed? So what mitigating strategies could procurement develop for these? And should procurement effectively be represented permanently at your audit and risk committees? Question. How powerful would the results of best practice procurement be in social media campaigns and PR in an age where the consumer is making decisions as much on the reputation of the company for doing the right thing than it is about the quality of any products? Mergers and acquisitions, what will the procurement impact be if merging with another business? Who are their suppliers? What contract commitments are you merging into? Similar with targets for acquisition, who's checking the procurement issues and finding the procurement risks during due diligence? And other issues, insourcing, outsourcing, offshoring, nearshoring, and exit. How can you leverage procurement to demonstrate good governance and increase the value of your business at exit? And basically, I've been looking forward to this one all day. How do you prevent corruption, control spend, and protect your brand? So the strapline was, who is spending up to 70% of your revenue, which hopefully is a chartered procurement professional, but probably might not be. So it's kind of opportunity for you to feedback. Do you have a procurement function? Is it well resourced? Are they qualified? Are they chartered? Where do they report into? Perhaps it's, with a few minutes left, let me know. That's your cue to come off mute and talk to me, guys.
There's quite a few questions in the chat, Chris, sorry.
No, pound for charity.
So whether people would like to come off mute to ask them.
I'd just like to, if I may, just make a couple of observations. So Chris and I know each other very well, and a lot of what Chris has said resonates very well with me as a former CIO in the housing sector, and Chris did an outstanding job in helping me. I would just observe, looking specifically at social housing, for which I think I spent 10 years working in. I think Chris, as I say, a lot of what you said resonates, and you will understand this. It resonates really well with me. I feel that the point that you made on the boardroom on point 5, hold to account, it's really, really important. And I would just highlight a point that you made, that you said the CIO, or the CEO, sorry, sees the vision of the future. And I think just in that particular sector, and I can't speak for any others, I'm not quite sure that they do. They don't quite get it, and they don't see that the value that a fully professional and invested in procurement function can deliver. So I was really pleased with what you had to say, really interesting. I don't think the issue is with procurement. I think it rests somewhere else. But yeah, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. It's really interesting.
Okay. So please ask the questions on the chat. What I commit to you all to is I'll respond to your questions. Probably not right now, but I'm very happy to connect with you all individually, and very happy to respond to your questions. So please ask them. One thing I am keen to get from you is a kind of an ending, I guess. I say, by all means, ask your questions, I'll answer them. I'm interested to get some, what's one thing you've learned this evening, or one thing that you might change your mind about. But what would be really interesting to know is, what are you going to do as a result of this evening? Is it going to change anything? Are you going to take any action as a result of this evening? Have you learned something? Are you going to do anything? So it'd be really great to get your feedback on that in the last few minutes. Or if you want to come off from mute and ask a question, go for it.